So first of all, thank you for the interest in AgTech and staying behind. I know it's one of the last sessions of the day. Thank you for making it through. Earlier today, we talked about technology, blockchain, data tracking, analytics. Deepti just gave a great presentation on Intel processing at the edge. What we have here today is a panel that's composed of people who actually make and are a key part of making the food that you eat every day. So these are people who have taken the time to come up and share their side of the story from the Central Valley. And I will be very, very happy to have you ask as many questions as possible. One of the goals of this communication is for you to also understand more about the Central Valley. So a little bit of background on my side, and then I'll shut up and transfer over to the panel. So I'm the founder of WaterBit, which is a company that started about 3 years ago to the week. And the first person that we connected with before we even incorporated or even had PowerPoint was Danny Royer. And so our relationship has gone back over years and is a very trusted relationship. And thank you for that. 3 years to the day. Right. So with that, we've grown and we now operate across California, Kansas, Iowa, and Ohio, probably soon into Mexico as well. That gives me a little bit of excuse to say I know a little bit of what's going on, but I also know I don't know enough. So with that, I'm going to throw a couple of very simple sounding questions to the panel. I invite you guys to also think about what you might want to know that we're not covering. And with that, I'm going to toss up the first one, which is a really simplistic sounding one. So, what does a day in your work life look like from a data point of view? Let's start with Danny.
So I start my day on my iPad looking at all of the information that was entered into our data collection system and spend probably the first 15-20 minutes of every morning going through and auditing and seeing that all of our data is entered by a person. So I start there, and then by mid-morning I'm at the office, and then usually by that point I've had 2 or 3 questions related to some sort of piece of information that's going on the farm, like when was this field planted, when was this spray application made. So spent a lot of time teaching people how to find those or answer those questions themselves using the new systems that we're using. So a lot of my day is just spent looking at data and then trying to figure out how to get that data to the right people on the farm.
By the way, I just wanted to apologize. I didn't properly introduce the panel. So Danny Royer is VP of Technology at Bowles Farm, which is over 13,000 acres in one of the most ecologically sensitive parts of California. Would you like to add more to that, Danny?
Yeah, so we farm on the southern tip of the largest contiguous grasslands, west of the Mississippi, next to the we're second next to the Everglades. So we have a lot of constraints that we choose to put on ourselves because of that. So there's a lot of interesting things outside of technology that we're also doing on the farm related to environmental stewardship and conservation.
Megan, would you like to add a bit more, or would you like me to make you blush by saying? I'll go for it then. Megan is one of the smartest people I know. She runs a company that rocks using geospatial data, and she is the driving force behind one of the few companies that can actually forecast harvest to any meaningful accuracy rate. I would like you want to add more to that?
Yeah, so my company Vinsight does yield forecasting for high value and specialty crops, which primarily exist in California as well as Australia. Our current focus right now is on almonds and grapes, and we utilize data to generate a 95% or better yield forecast 4+ months prior to harvest. So, yeah.
And Bart, I don't think you will blush, but we'll just try it. So Bart is the owner and runs Pacific Ag Rentals. It's a very innocent sounding company until you realize he rents out about 2,000 pieces of equipment across California and neighboring states, which means he knows more about what farmers are actually paying for than most people. In other words, I have been to a lot of AgTech conferences and I see people promoting things, but he knows what the check is being written for. And that's a big distinction. And so that's an immense amount of data collected across states, timelines, and crops. Would you want to add more to that, Mark?
Yeah, I think
Please.
one main aspect that's missing with a lot of technology that we see, and we're really positioned to handle that, and that is service and support. A lot of technology is coming to agriculture, and if there is no support to it, if there is no service aspect of it, the farmers are not interested in that technology. So with all of our 200 plus employees that we have that are servicing, that are supporting, that are salespeople, and more importantly, our black book. And so we know which farmers to do business with in California, Arizona, and we're pushing further into Mexico. We have those relationships already built up. So it makes it a lot easier to get technology and have that adoption rate a lot quicker than what it actually is if you tried to sell something to a farmer lately. It's a little bit of a challenge. So we've got those relationships built up. My family's been doing this since the late 60s. So we've got some relationships. So we're in a good spot right now.
Thank you. And now with that, I'll go back to the question, Megan.
Yes.
How do you use data in your daily life?
Yeah, so being that Vinsight is a data analytics company, we are looking at data on a daily basis. So in the busy time, which happens to be around April usually for most crops, is when we're really starting to kind of look at different time series of information sets that come from satellite imagery, climate and weather data solutions, and we're really looking for patterns in order to identify what mostly correlates against yield. And so for us, in terms of data that we're looking at daily, it typically revolves around weather trends. And there's specific agricultural indices that we look at. One is growing degree days, which is a very common one in industry, that we're trying to track to identify, are we above, below, or about average typically, because that happens to be a very high correlating factor. And then we're also looking for anomalies in data sets on our side. When you are a data aggregator like Vinsight, and data comes in many different formats, and there's always issues with sensors that happen to be in ground in the sense of like weather data, for example. You need to understand where those anomalies lie early on so you can detect them and then either correct for that within the back end before you put that data into modeling. So from my standpoint, it's a lot of information kind of gathering and then trying to really understand where are there potential issues within the data set in order to correct for that.
Bart?
Looking at data, we've been collecting data for the last 10 years on our farm equipment on maintenance records, on when to repair things, when are things going to fail. We're taking that and aggregating that into a system that we can make better decisions with. We also have just came into the Robovator, which is an automatic weeder that we're using that replaces 11 people, which everybody's saying, why do we want to place 11 people? Well, we don't have those 11 people to go out in the field and pull the weeds. So we have that, and now with that machine, we're able to collect a lot of data as we're going through the field. So we can see crop stands, crop yields, and then what other technology can we put on there to start to give a dashboard back to the farmer to where that they can make decisions. So besides the typical KPIs that we're looking at on a daily basis, such as utilization, time, dollar utilization, looking at how to make sure we're maximizing our ROIs on our equipment fleet, it's what else can we do with other data sets that is actually out in the field that can be beneficial to the farmer, and that's what we're pushing on right now.
Thank you. So from right away, you can see the variety of applications of data in a very rigorous, mathematically driven systems. These are totally non-random. So one of the pet peeves that I have is regulation. And I'm going to ask Danny to talk about FSMA and things like that, because we just went through a discussion with Trimble on the retail side of data and traceability. And so, Danny, would you like to give us a view into your life when FSMA comes around, the audits?
Yeah,
Talk about it.
It's very, very clear to me that a lot of people who aren't actually doing the work are the ones writing the rules as soon as we start going in to do the things that we're required to do. I think that there's the general concept of food safety is great, and we need to have systems and tools in place to do that, but when you're mechanism to do that is having someone fill out a piece of paper saying that they did something and there's not actually anything tangible to make sure that it happened. You're just relying on people saying that they did it. It just becomes a headache for the person doing it, And so they're going to start being complacent. So one of the challenges I have with food safety on our farm is actually we want to have safe food. We want to have these protocols and systems in place, but the requirements involved with how much data we have to collect make it a mundane process where we aren't actually paying attention to the problems we should be looking for. So there's data overload in a sense that they're wanting too much information and we don't have the systems in place to provide it yet. It's all human input at this point. The other side of the food safety discussion that's frustrating is that there's also this big push for sustainability coming from retailers and people that we provide raw product to. And the food safety demands often conflict with sustainability demands. So if I have a sustainability metric that's related to the number of species that live on my farm, great, we'll go do what we can to create more species, but that's going to conflict with my food safety requirement that I need to prevent, any foreign material like excrement from a wild animal in my field. So we have a big challenge in right now in farms to balance out those demands, and we're trying as much as we can to help use data to highlight those challenges. So we're looking at, like this last week, I have 200 pages for a dozen fields of field inspections reports that no one will ever do anything with. So there's just this forces on farms right now where there's a lot of opportunity in people that can collect data and aggregate it and help us organize it. But you also have to understand that the forces that are being put on farmers aren't being driven by the farmer. So a farmer who is already resisting food safety because these are these new rules I have to follow is going to have a level of resistance to a tool that's going to help them do that until they understand that they have to do it, and this tool is going to make it a lot easier. But there's a lot of opportunity to develop tools to help us with these challenging forces that we actually have on the farm right now.
So that was a pretty interesting perspective. When you look at it, the thing that keeps coming up again and again is everyone wants to do the easy work of doing data processing in the cloud. But the fundamental problem that we're hearing consistently is, how do you get the data? And without getting the data, you have a problem. So there's a situation where we have the data you have and the data you want. And one of the I think the key challenges is the use of data for many things, from forecasting harvest to also tracking water usage and things like that. So what I'd like to do is toss up a softball for Megan and say, given the way you have data today and the kind of data you want, where do you see things evolving? What would you like to have in data assets, data processing, and data capability to deliver better value to your clients?
Yeah, so we'll start with, I guess, just a simple one around data acquisition. So right now, per what Danny is discussing, a lot of data that is collected on farm oftentimes sits in either Excel files or notebooks like these, or Word documents, for example. They don't even typically even make it to like a Google Doc format. And the way in which that people format all of their information is very different. And the way that it is formatted by field manager is also different. The way that people will call certain fields or certain areas of fields and the way that they'll refer to different things, it's different all across the board. And so one of the things that we have worked hard on with our initial clients is we have a systematic way of how we like to collect data on farm when it comes from your geographical information, the way that you call field names, yield, and the list kind of goes on there. But from our standpoint, one thing that would be incredible would be if all field managers walked around with iPads and automatically populated data into Excel files that we could then get a big data dump, because we're not at a place where you're going to get like an API that you'll just be able to pull automatically data on a daily basis. It's not going to happen. That doesn't even exist for a good portion of weather stations. If people know this, connectivity is a huge issue in the Central Valley. We have customers who give us weather data on a thumb drive still. And we get that weather data from them like once a week, every 2 weeks if they remember. It depends on kind of where they're at. So From our standpoint, data collection just being in a more systematic way around whether that be an iPad or a phone where you're automatically inputting that information in order to get on a regular schedule. And then from a sensor standpoint, because there's lots of different sensors that exist on the market right now, if we could start working and coming up with standards as to how that information could be better shared with a company like us that is an aggregator of this type of information in order to better serve both our mutual customer at the end of the day. And right now, that's not something that's necessarily popular. If any of you have heard of Ag Gateway, it is a program that people are trying to put a little bit of effort behind in order to come up with these types of standards. So a company like Vinsight could have a much easier job at analyzing and pulling in information and data from different sensor providers, but it isn't something that exists yet. So the day when that actually happens, it will be a beautiful world for on-farm data. Outside of on-farm data, things are pretty nice, but in the farm, that is where things get really sticky.
And I noticed Danny nodding your head on that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We're in the process of converting all of our old Excel files that were formatted so someone could print them into Google Sheets right now. Like, she's dead on.
One of the other things I noticed, one of the topics got Bart and I talking was, how do you get data comms onto the field, going to Megan's point? So I usually describe the directions to find one of my clients is drive down I-5, and when you reach the place where the cows really stink up the road and you turn left, when you run out of cell signal, you're about right. So, and then you have this pocket 1 kilometer where then the cell turns back on. So now I'd like to toss that over to Bart. Now, given your field equipment and you need to maintain your business running at peak performance and deliver value to the clients, how do you see, what do you want things, where do you see your demand for data coming? What would you like to see happen? If anyone out there in the crowd here today can solve a problem for you, what would you like them to do?
You know, I can go through and see where data is. It just seems like we're just at the tip of the iceberg with agriculture. If you looked at the person that wanted the most IoT was the military, and now I think that's changing over to agriculture. I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg for technology coming into agriculture. So we're data generators, and we want to take that data and put it in a format that makes sense that the farmer will pay for. Right now, I think the problem that I see with a lot of technology, I was at a technology conference a couple of months ago, looking at all this new technology that's out there. I'm standing with a farmer friend of mine, and he's looking around the room, looking at all this new technology, and says, "This is going to help farming," and he walked out. So I think it's not, trying to go through and find a solution, then go find a problem. It's understanding the problem up front and then going through and finding different silos of solutions and putting those together to make something that'll work. So back to what we're doing, since we have so much equipment, 2,000 pieces of equipment in 4 different states and into Mexico, since we're running through the field, what can we go through and collect? What can we put on these pieces of equipment? What data can we collect as we go through there? What can we put on the workers? What can we put on the tractors? We're going through probably every 3 days, every 2 to 3 days. So put in that with some flyby on on an airplane, put in some drone information in there and some other scouting information in there. And all of a sudden we're getting a pretty good look of what's happening out on the farm, where pests are at, how they're invading, any diseases that come through. So since I just think we're the great vehicle to go through and do that. So if we could have somebody that was out there that could provide us with something, it would be taking all this information, bringing it into one format to where we could have a dashboard that could go through and help the farmers. I mean, I think that's what Danny's looking for, is everybody seems to be talking in different language. John Deere's talking in their language, and then somebody else is talking in their language. Let's make the Tower of Babel. Let's bring everybody together and reverse that and bring everybody in talking the same language. Then all of a sudden, if we can quit thinking about it as a Salinas Valley problem or Central Valley problem or California problem or United States problem, it's a world problem. Let's go through and bring everybody together and get us all working together on what we can do to help out with agriculture. And I think we play a good part with having the equipment out there that can go through and collect that data.
To add to that really quickly, I'm sorry, for those of you who most likely haven't sat down with a farmer and looked at their workflow, they look at like 10 different screens, and each one of those screens tells you something different. There is no single port where you can go to and look at and be like, all this information makes sense. Basically, The farmer is serving as the computer analysis who is looking at one thing and saying, okay, but how does that potentially correlate with something over here? And having to make those kind of decisions on the fly, and it's not all consolidated in one place. Just to add to that, sorry.
No, this is exactly the challenge that I'm seeing as well when I work with with our clients as well. One of the things that I also wanted to try to bring out in this panel, which given time and space is limited, when we talk about AgTech, I don't know what people think about it, because I think AgTech can mean different things to different people. We can start with genetics and CRISPR technology. We can go all the way to advanced tractor systems or retail packaging or robotics for processing. They're all part of AgTech and the value chain. And what I think is a great opportunity for discussion after this event as well, and maybe for questions, is how can we positively impact the value chain? How do we improve the quality of product and the quality of output without adding unnecessary costs to the system? And this is just a general question. So we are coming about to the end. I think I have about 2 or 3 minutes left. Who's my timekeeper? Yeah. We actually have extra time because we started late. Yeah, cool. Okay, so given that, we have time for questions, if there are any questions. Otherwise, I will continue. Can you grab a mic?
Right up here, Manu.
Thanks, a great panel, Bert Wank and Finirel. I had the benefit 6 years ago to work with biogas in Germany. I'd like to address the question of business model. I totally associate with you. We had a road show and we talked to a farmer in HealthTech, and he's like, we've got boots on and dirt. Software they couldn't wrap their arms around. It was very difficult to sell software. How do you think the business model makes it easier? What business model is easy for farmers to adopt and actually transact on? What do they understand for the transaction part?
I think the business model is going to be very dependent upon the farm and the crops that they grow on the farm, because my farm, our average revenue for a crop is, on a great year, $4,000 to $5,000 an acre. You go to the Salinas Valley, add another zero to that. So our willingness to put money into those inputs, which that's what software would be for us, would be an input, is going to be very dependent upon the types of crop that we're growing. So I would, if I'm looking at building a business model for ag, I'm looking at what type of crop is this going towards, because that's going to be what type of value you're going to be able to find, and that's what the grower is going to be willing to invest.
To add to that, scalability and pricing. So Vinsight covers multiple crop types, and with grapes alone, you will see price points that vary 10x, dependent on where and location. And so our pricing model scales with the value of the crop in which we are servicing, very much to kind of Danny's comment. Another way, farmers at the end of the day are business people, like anybody. If you save them money or you make them money, they will adopt. If you are cost, no, that's not happening. Because a lot of times there is not room within the balance sheet for cost. There is room for savings, there is room for additional revenue, but not added cost. They don't need more of that. So if you really figure out a way to, one, solve a problem, and that problem also helps either alleviate expense or brings additional revenue in, your adoption is not going to be the typical 3 to 5 years that people usually see.
And to add to that, I would say also accessibility for the farmer. So sometimes the farmer's appetite for new technology is not that strong. So we found a lot of, since we've been doing this since the late 60s, we understand how to do that. And one of the ways is ownership is overrated. Let's go through and rent it to them. So our company would go through and buy that technology and come back and rent it to them to let them to try that out, get them comfortable with that, get their asset base up. Because remember, if you look at the skill set of most of their people, it's not up to running an iPad. Right, so we need to allow the farmer the time to experience the equipment, and then train up his employees to start to handle that, to be able to be comfortable with that technology. So another thing is renting it to make sure that they can get used to that technology.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So my company TeleSense, we are using IoT and AI technology to reduce wastage, and we are focusing on grain. What keeps farmers awake at night? Is wastage, spoilage, top 2 things they worry about, or is number 10 on the list?
So I've worked in different types of farms, and the answer to that question would be different depending on which farm I worked at. today what keeps me up at night as the VP of tech on our farm is data silos. And the fact that I have all of this great information in these different places that people can't access. The pinch point right now for our farm is labor. Labor is getting extremely expensive, so from a cost standpoint, that's where we have a lot of focus going into. All of our inputs are where the opportunities are, but it's going to be very different for us because like our water is substantially cheaper than if you go 5 miles down the road. So to answer some of these questions, you really have to know the area or really know which farmer it is that you're talking to, because we can't create general. Now in grain, I'm sure that there's concerns when you get into the elevator and you get into the next phases after the actual growing of the crop. But like our farm specifically, we're looking at really labor right now as in terms of a cost that we're really worried about. Labor is it.
5,000-foot overview, Western Growers just went through and did a survey and surveyed all their members, and they looked at the top 10 concerns. The top 3, labor was number 1, number 2 was regulation, number 3 was water.
Anything to add to that, Megan? Or you?
No, so as far as grain goes, I know very little about the grain industry. I can tell you a lot about almonds and a lot about grapes. And within those markets, a lot of times it has to do with weather and timing of weather. For example, there was a huge almond frost that happened during bloom, and that kept a lot of growers up at night in terms of how they were going to mitigate frost and potentially save their bloom, so that way there was some sort of crop that was to be in existence. So it honestly, to echo kind of what Danny's saying, it depends on crop. Farmers' concerns are very much so based around labor inputs, and that means water and nutrition as well.
Based on my observation driving around, I've seen a number of acres of unpicked crop due to labor shortage. So I think labor ranks higher than wastage right now, from what I'm seeing.
And that's where technology can come in.
One more
Definitely.
question.
This side, can I?
Oh, excuse me. My
Hi,
apologies.
my name is Upendra, and I come from a farm in India. And back then, 45 years back, they will still depend on cloud. Not the cloud we talk about here.
Yeah, right. Rain, got it. Yeah.
But the God is going to bless you with the rains, right? Mm-hmm. Because we have set weathers, right? So the challenge is not about data there. Challenge, especially in that part of the world, because I'm working with 3 state governments right now in India, where farmers are committing suicide because they don't get necessarily paid for what they produce, because their product never get to see the consumer, right? So challenge is in the value chain, you know. We are trying to see how the technology we are talking about here, how can this really help a person who is not necessarily literate to begin with. So their challenges are much different than the challenges we are talking about here, right? So when the data is there, you can analyze the data and come to a conclusion. When data is absolutely missing and you are depending every single thing on all sorts of uncertainty around you, right? So how do we go about fixing this problem? I'm sure we cannot necessarily solve this problem here, but I just wanted to throw this because 90% people coming from the same land where I come from, and are they thinking in those terms that how do we solve that problem?
If you wouldn't mind, let me take the first ball on that, and I'll hand it back to the panel.
Thank you.
So first of all, I want to give amazing credit to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for funding Farm Beats at Microsoft, if Tony Shigebe is still here. It's an amazing project intended to address some of the problems you raised. And it's essentially the use of Azure-based computer modeling using sparse sensor sets to increase the modeling performance. In essence, trying to do what Megan is doing, but on semi-tropical areas. The second part is the reason I started WaterBit was to address that problem eventually. Right now, we're at a higher price point that can be afforded in India. And our part of that is a precision irrigation and controlled watering, where we are able to show dramatic savings in water. So we can talk after that, but I'll hand over to the panel for additional comment.
Thank you.
So I think that to build on, I think what Manu is doing is using our farm to develop a technology that someday the price point will be at a point that it can be distributed to anyone. And maybe we need to go into the financial tech conversations to talk about how to make that technology available for small farmers. But that technology still needs to be developed, the systems behind it, the logic behind it that's used. And so one of the things that our farm does and that we're proud of is we're very transparent. So whatever we learn in terms of how to grow cotton, using drip and using this technology, we are going to be very, very transparent and understand that we have different weather patterns, different environment, and all these different things, but we're going to have a base set of data on if you do these things, you will produce this. We're going to be transparent with it, and I think that that's one of the only ways that we can solve some of the food insecurity issues that we have outside of the fact that 30% of the crops that we grow don't get harvested, which is a whole nother conversation. But to help the grower in India that is, I mean, it's sad. Like, why? I love farming, and I'm fortunate that I have a lot of security in my life, but clearly there's not security there. If I had a tool that could very effectively tell me exactly when to put water on and when to turn it off, and it would improve my yield by 50%, and I can get financing to make that happen, that starts solving the problem, but we have to develop the solution before we can get there and the logic. So I think that we're moving in that direction.
Thank you.
Absolutely, the last question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about data, you said that you wake up in the morning, you spend 15 minutes looking at data. Now, I come from a point where, I have a hypothesis that what if farmers had just one insight from the data? You don't have to look at all that data, but that data tells you one specific point, such as this pest will attack 3 days from now, go spray your fungicide or insecticide at 4 in the evening. How would that be for a farmer?
Are you automating my tractor to go do that?
That could happen with edge computing, but at least telling you what could happen on your farm, like giving you that one specific insight, actionable insight that you could follow instead of looking at all that data.
So I'm going to let Megan build off of me, but I'm going to say that absolutely there's value in that, but I grow 21 crops.
Yeah.
So that KPI for each crop or that key indicator that I need is different for everyone.
Yeah, so we do one thing, and we do it really well, and we forecast yield. And that is exactly how much per acre you are going to generate for your crop. And we do that in 2 crops, and that is grapes and almonds right now. We started with yield because yield is one of those things that touches a lot of other areas along the value chain. Yield is tied to your water need, yield is tied to your fertility management need, how much nitrogen, et cetera, that kind of goes into it. And yield happens to be uniform across all different types of crop types. In general, I would say, coming from the Central Valley and speaking with lots of farmers, as soon as you start to replace the idea of you're telling the grower that this is what you need to do and go and spray in like 3 days, you're removing at some level some of the artistic element of what it means to be a grower and what it means for them to do their job. And you will also start to kind of provide a difficult adoption cycle for you because you're now telling them how to do their job better. Now, that's not necessarily what you're trying to say, but that type of solution at this current moment, that's basically how that is interpreted and what that means. We even get that with, oh, you're telling me my yield? How could you do that? I know better than you do. It's like, of course you do, but let us be helpful in the way that we use data and information and so on and so forth. So in a perfect world, I think that the idea of that makes me personally very excited, to the idea that a grower would be able to sit at home and put their tractor out automatically when it's time to go spray, when it's time to harvest, and all of those things would just be kind of happening autonomously. The reality is that we're really far away from that being a reality. And in the meantime, there's a lot of other low-hanging fruit that really needs to be solved for that to even be achievable.
Let's wrap up with Bart. Any comment to that, and we can wrap up.
Yeah, I know farming's a challenge, and there's a lot of different obstacles that are in there. And just to say that one key component is going to be is just like even what Danny was saying, there's so many different crops, so many different farmers, and every farmer is kind of doing the same thing, but they're doing a little bit different because they think their next door neighbor's dumb, and they're super smart because they turn on their water at 3 a.m. in the morning instead of 4 a.m. in the morning. So there's a lot of different nuances in farming that I think the tech world is not really, and it's different from different growing regions, different people, different farmers, different locations, different towns that are 10 feet apart. Have different ways of doing things, and they look at that as their IP. So to get everybody to play on the same playing field is it's not going to happen.
So thank you all for being a great audience, a lot of good questions. And I also want to thank our panel. The shortest commute today for the panel to come in, the shortest was 1.5 hours. So I want a one-way. So thank you for coming.